So now I'm going to do a little song and dance while everybody gets on here. And I actually have a live person here. It's super exciting. All right. Uh, yeah, I can type and talk at the same time. Yeah, sometimes. Yay! All right. And okay, good. You can see the chat too, so you can say, "Hey, Ann, what up?" Well, I'd say you probably are going to win the prize tonight for having come the furthest. So, I assume you're in Ecuador still. And this is recorded for all eternity, but I assume you chatted with Chelsea this yesterday or something. Don't know anything else yet about that, so we shall see over the next few weeks what any of that foolishness is. So if you're just joining us, I'm going to get started right at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for those of you in Ecuador. Uh, and we've got a list of a couple of good questions here. So feel free to type in any questions into the chat, and I'll get started right from the get-go, right after I find all my papers here. And, if you're just now listening, fast forward like 6 minutes. There we go. There's my other notes. Ha! All right. Um, so, let's see how many people I got on here. It's always a trick. Nope, I don't want any tips. Oh, I got a bunch of people on here. Awesome sauce. So, all of you lurkers out there, go have a glass of water. We'll get started here in 5 minutes. And if you're hearing this on YouTube later, fast forward 5 minutes, and then you can get the actual start of this, because I'm just going to stall until then. We actually have a live person in the studio audience today. Yeah. So if you hear somebody chiming in from the background, you'll know why. And if you're just joining us, feel free to let us know who you are, type in any questions, let us know where you're from. I challenge you all to beat Anne for being the furthest away. I don't know. I had somebody from like Indonesia a couple of months ago, so you're in for some competition maybe. And actually, I had somebody from Chile, so I don't know. We'll see whether any of them show up tonight. You can translate for me. All right. Looks like we got a good crowd coming on. So, hey, Allison. And if anybody's there that I met at the American Herbalist Guild conference, definitely say hey. Hey, Tiffany. Oh yes. we definitely had fun there at the booth in AHG. I'll try to talk about that a little bit. So yeah, definitely had a good time. I didn't know you all knew each other, so that's awesome. All right, I gotta get that in the right place. All right, that works. Okay, so if you're just getting on, go ahead and type any questions you might have. We'll get started here in 3 minutes. And you are in the right place. It's Bob Linde and the Herbal Open Forum in St. Petersburg, Florida, or wherever you are. That's where I am. And we got room. Hey, Kristen, I got you on here. That's an easy one. I was shocked. It was such a short question from you this time. I was like, oh, I can do this in 2 seconds. I'll talk about it a bit. So it looks like we got a good crowd coming on. All right, we're going to get started here in just a couple minutes. Let us know who you are, where you're from. Type any questions you might have into the chat box there, and I will add it to the queue. And if you're nearby, there's still time to come by. Oh yeah, what about it? Hopefully it's working well. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it's not very nice, but it does work. All right, we'll get started here in just a minute. Actually, you know what? I'm going to add that into the queue. We don't talk about that very often, and that's kind of relevant from AHG. And Oh, heck, what's the name of that herb? Oh, it's so bad. Piety. There we go. If Timo's there, ask him what he knows about piety. Piri, a small, low-growing plant, because I've been challenged. It's one of two plants, and it may be one I know as an antiparasitic. It's growing probably where you all are. So, all right, if you're just joining us, type your questions into the box. We'll add it to the queue. I'm Bob Linde. Yay, we'll get started here in just a minute. Let us know who you are, where you're from, or not. That's okay, too. All right. I've got 1 minute. I'm going to make sure nobody emailed me at the last second. I know that happens sometimes. And no. All right. I'm going to say it's 6 o'clock, close enough for government work. If you don't know it, I'm Bob Linde from the Tradition School of Herbal Studies and Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies here in sunny St. Petersburg, Florida. Sorry, my bad TV voice. I got the right page in front of me. And we've got a clinical practice here with 4 acupuncture physicians, a full apothecary of Western Chinese and bioregional herbs here that anybody can come to. You don't have to have a formula written by an herbalist. We have 2 herbalists on staff and a nursery in the back and the student clinic 3 nights a week. Monday nights are my acupuncture interns. Tuesday nights, my Western herb students. And on Wednesday night, my Chinese herb students, all of them getting supervised clinical practice. So it's an opportunity if you're, for whatever reason, not able to come in during the day to see our full-time practitioners. You can get there on a night and get a reduced rate. And you're going to have a couple people in the room. They're going to quiz you to death. And I get to go in and check their tongue and pulse and make sure they're on the right track on getting you balanced out. And then the school, we've got so much stuff going on, it's ridiculous. We've got the Chinese program that starts tomorrow. I'm going to say, if you're interested in the Chinese program and you haven't already talked to Tricia or gotten the emails, send an email because after it starts tomorrow, you have to make the first 3 classes in order to continue with the program. And we've got a Western Herbal program where it's Western Herbal 101 is our starting point. And we've got a couple of entry points. We've got a Western Herbal 101 starts on November 5-6. And then we have that same class again, December 3-4. And so that's the prerequisite to go on to the 8-week-long, or 8-weekend-long 8-month foundations program, which is the requirement to go on to the advanced, which includes the clinical aspects of it. And the Chinese, both programs are about 2 years long, and both have about a year of clinical time. The Chinese a little bit more clinical, the Western a little bit more diverse and more bioregional plants, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. There's also an Ayurvedic series, which is just a series of standalone classes that are on Thursday evenings. It's one Thursday a month. Our next one is on nutrition and cooking, which that involves eating and yummy smells. And Gray is teaching that on November 10th. Definitely sign up ahead of time. And you can check the website, traditionsherbschool.com, for more information, or you can find a link on the Traditions Herb School Facebook page. And we've got, for all of those folks who want to be herbalists but haven't seen any anatomy and physiology or pathology classes since they were in high school, we've got the anatomy and physiology for the herbalist, which is, again, one Thursday night a month, and it follows along with our foundations class. So this coming, I didn't write the date on that, coming up next week, I think, is the musculoskeletal system. And then Ruthie, who teaches both the Western and Chinese herbal program as well, has a medicine making circle that is sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening, just to make sure everybody gets a fair shot. But our next one is November 17th in the evening, and they're going to be talking about, for 2.5 hours, talking about one herb, which is super amazing. And they're going to be talking about goldenrod. And goldenrod's actually an amazing plant that nobody talks about enough. It has such a diverse set of indications, from UTIs to chronic sinus infections to diaphoretic for colds and flu. Oh, and there was one last one I wanted to mention, just because it's relevant as the season does progress. December 2nd, um, Ruthie is having a class, handcrafted herbals, and so I'm pretty sure they're making all kinds of cool holiday gifts out of herb things. And I know there's no prerequisites, but I think there's a few supplies that you've got to bring to participate with all the good stuff. All right, I said AccuHerbals, I said .com and traditionsherbschool.com. And if you don't know it, this is something I started during the pandemic. Just we felt so disconnected from our community. All of our conferences were scheduled, and I just like missed ranting at people endlessly. Um, Nice. Uh, and so I started doing this one evening a month. I was like, I figure I always got 2 hours, and opened it up, and it was really such a hit, and it was such a nice thing during the pandemic. But I was surprised at how far and wide it went as far as people coming from other countries, like for real. Um, and so, even after the pandemic was no longer an issue for classes, I decided it was a good way to just keep in touch and expand beyond the borders of Tampa Bay. So, went ahead and kept doing it. And although most of our classes are done on Zoom as well as in person, I kept it on Facebook just out of my own convenience. And again, just to source another group of people. If you're just joining us, please do feel free to introduce yourself. No requirements. But if you've got any questions you'd like me to cover, just type them into the chat box, and I will put them in the queue. So many things to talk about tonight. It's really fun. I just got back Tuesday from the American Herbalist Guild conference, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's our professional organization as herbalists, and you can find more information about it on their website. Anybody can join AHG. You don't have to have taken any particular class or special letters after your name. So they have a general membership that's available for anybody who thinks herbs are cool. It's very reasonable, and there's such a wealth of information on their website. You are getting probably thousands of dollars worth of information if you spend the time going through their webinars that are archived, all of their articles, the proceedings from the last 10 plus years of conferences. There's also a student membership, so if you're actively enrolled in an herb program, it doesn't matter whose. If you're actively enrolled in any kind of herbal related stuff, you can get a student membership, which is a couple bucks off. And then they have professional membership, which, if you've seen my name about, sometimes I bother to put the RH off of there. Hey, Roddy. And that RH is registered herbalist. And basically that means that you're part of the Scooby Club. No, it means that you've demonstrated that you've got a diagnostic system to work under, that you've had some sort of training. It doesn't have to be a particular program. They do set out standards, academic standards, that they'd like a school to follow, which of course our school does. 4 years of clinical practice, turn in a couple of case discussions, kind of explore ideas of what your philosophy as treatment is, and to explain your diagnostic system. And that diagnostic system can be Western, Chinese, Ayurvedic, medical. All of those are considered super appropriate to apply with. And it is a mark of distinction, and also puts you on their website as somebody with an RH. And I can safely say it has my RH over the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years, whatever it's been, really allowed, yeah, I get a couple of clients a year maybe from it. But I know when somebody says, do you know anybody in a particular state? I go, if I don't personally know somebody, I go to the HG website to see who's in that area, that I either recognize their name or their credentials looks appropriate. And also, probably once a year, I get contacted as a formulator for some sort of an herbal company, two-legged or four-legged. And somewhere in the world, I've been hired in Jamaica, in the U.S., and somewhere else at some point. And it looks like I may actually get hired to do some work in Ecuador in that realm as well. So I always think that, I know for all of my students, I always encourage them, that they strive towards that RH. There's no program that can guarantee it to you, but we are one of the few programs that has ongoing clinical practice, which is obviously an important part of all of that. So I'm going to talk about HG conference a little bit, just because I think it's cool. Needless to say, I've been a fan. I've been a fan since the day I walked into their first conference. My first conference at HG, that was probably 24 years ago, something like that. It was in Helen, Georgia. I can't think of the name of the state park there. And I was in acupuncture school at the time. I walked in and A, I was intimidated, and B, I knew I'd been to other conferences for a variety of subjects. And it was like, oh, I walked in, these are my people. And it was exciting to see, A, the authors of the books, the people I was reading, and there were people who were way smarter than me there, that they knew a lot of stuff. They really gave a good nod towards the energetic systems, especially Chinese medicine, because of its effectiveness for treating complex disorders and understanding how to match herbs and formulation and so forth, along with the imbalances of the humans. And it was funny, I distinctly remember, I think it was maybe a year and a half into school, if that, and I wandered in on free weekend, and I knew that I joined that day. I knew that I wanted to participate on the HG board, that I wanted to teach for this conference when I was ready, and that I wanted to start an herb school. All of that before I graduated from acupuncture school. And it was really nice. I certainly within a few years had accomplished all of those things. But even more exciting is they came back to that place in Georgia probably almost 20 years later, and I got to teach there, and it was very exciting. It was a proud moment for me. And at this age, I'm going to say I teach there every other year. They discourage us from teaching every single year unless we're invited to, so much as I want to teach every year for them. I had the privilege, whenever you apply for an herb conference, you send in like 3 or 4 or 5 things that you're super excited about. And one of the things I sent in was all about poop. And so everything that our poop tells us. And so I had way too much fun giving, basically 2 hours of poop jokes. No, it was informative as well and well received. But I was really excited because one of Ruthie, who is one of the clinicians at the school, was clinical supervisors and teachers in both the Western and Chinese program, and a graduate of the Western and Chinese programs, as well as studying herbs long before I knew her. And just really was a beautiful thing, because she taught at the HG conference and was very well received. And so it was her first time teaching at that conference, was this past weekend. So she had her whole family there to support her, and a number of our students and graduates all showed up. So that was really exciting to see that torch passed on, although I'm still going to compete for the next spots. So next year, the conference, I believe, I don't remember the dates, but they're probably up on their website already. The next conference, I believe, is in Colorado, up in the mountains. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to be there even if I don't have a table or I'm teaching. It doesn't matter. I'm going to Colorado for a tax write-off to learn stuff. It's funny, as soon as I got back, I was fun. I got to stop at Shenandoah National Park, and it was challenging because it was fall. Almost winter. The leaves were beautiful, but trying to ID plants without the flowers, without their full leaf complement. And it was interesting to be walking through the mountains there and trying to identify just the remnants to look for some medicinal plants. There wasn't a lot to harvest, but it's certainly beautiful. Drove a little bit further south and went to North Carolina in a park that I totally don't remember the name of, and walked out, and we could find new plants out there, or some of the same plants, but not as far gone into their winter siesta, if you will. And then stopped at the Okefenokee Swamp and canoed there for a couple of hours, all of this on the way home. And obviously saw new bioregional plants plus some of the northern plants. And so as any of us start to explore either a new community, the Northeast, I won't say is foreign to me, but it's one I'm out of practice on. Our botany skills, our ability to harvest is always interesting, in that how do we recognize the plants when they're not in the exact same stage of their development? So when I got back on Tuesday night, because I'm lazy. Oh yeah, you get some of the poop. I'll write that one down. Um, I ended up on Wednesday. I went down to Sarasota and did an herb walk down there, and one of the things that happened, it was a park I'd never been to. I found plants that were out of season. There was the poor man's pepper or peppergrass, um, and that's like 3 months early at least. Um, and I found the largest epizota I've ever seen in my life. The stem was as big around as my thumb. But one thing that baffled a bunch of people, I identified this one plant as the beautyberry, American beautyberry, but it didn't have the berries on it. So nobody knew what it was. And I was like, smell it. We have to be able to use all of our senses and our training as botanists to be able to appropriately identify them, both in different phases of weather, different terrain, and ultimately in different countries that we can find interesting things. All right. I'll babble a little. I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to talk. Oh, and actually, that herb walk. I do want to say this. It was from Transition Sarasota, which has been. They've been having me come down there and do talks and herb walks every year for I don't know, long time. I'm a bad judge of time, but they're a local nonprofit there in Sarasota. They do a lot of good stuff, but mostly it's about educating people about local access to food. And usually they're talking about connecting with farmers and getting rid of our footprint. But growing plants, all of those things are important. And so me saying you don't have to find a farmer, you don't have to be a gardener, you just have to stop mowing your lawn to find both food and medicine. I feel like the Transition Sarasota always fit in well. And we had a really nice, I think we had like 16, 18 people who showed up, which was a great size to have out there on an herb walk. It wasn't overwhelming or too large. All right, let's talk about. Oh, I'm going to hit the one at the top of the list. Esophageal constriction is a nasty thing, and they wrote that I think it was a family member was dealing with this, and basically it's your esophagus, your throat closes down, usually in association with a particular food or drink, so bad that you can no longer swallow, that you're choking on your food. It can get scary and dangerous. I've watched those attacks happen. I'm happy to say I don't have that issue. But my mom and my brother both dealt with that. And at the time I was challenged by like, what does this mean? How is it understood energetically? And it was really funny. The treatment for esophageal constriction, pretty much regardless of the cause, is either Botox injections into your throat, into the muscles and ligaments around your throat, or what I call salad tongs. More technical is a stretching of your throat, but for all practical purposes, they stick some solid tongs down and spread the opening so that it's easier for food to pass through. That has variety of negative side effects long term. And the problem is, it's really funny, and I double checked this because I was like, I'd never heard of it being hereditary. And the person who wrote in said, well, it may be hereditary, but nobody else in the family has it as far as they knew. I'd never heard of it being hereditary. And although it is interesting, my brother and mother both had it, but so far so good. I can scarf down food like nobody's business. And what I saw was GERD, acid reflux. It can be a side effect of certain medications. It can be a side effect of radiation in that area. It can be a idiopathic, which is one of my favorite words, they have no idea. So there's a number of different causes for it. The only one that wasn't listed, I checked 3 different sources, was genetics. So I thought that was fascinating that was what the doctor went on. And I checked the Cleveland Clinic and Mayo Clinic, and they're usually pretty up on their stuff. So I'm going to say whatever. The person said that they were not enjoying that particular thing. Oh, and food sensitivities. That was the other thing. Was food sensitivities can be a trigger for it. And I know in my brother's case, if he didn't stop and chew long enough, which my family is bad about, too big a piece of food, he would be challenged. My mom, it was certain foods and textures of foods. So things like rice, for some reason, which should be easy to swallow, was one of her triggers. So looking at reducing triggers by recognizing the foods, excusing them when, like, I remember lovely restaurant and mom ate whatever and literally had to excuse herself as she was turning funny colors as she needed to literally vomit so she could breathe. So not my idea of a good time. Um, I used a Chinese, although I'm sure you could do it with Western herbs, I definitely took a Chinese approach to this. And it's funny, Tabitha, it almost kind of goes in with your question as well. Huh. All right, I'm going to have to work on that one. Sorry, I got to read all of that. And so for me, it was a type of chi stagnation that oftentimes does manifest in the throat. Um, and I ended up using a formula that is for nausea and vomiting. So I was using the same kind of approach as you would use for acid reflux. And I used a formula called Shuganwan, and I'm going to type that in there. And I used I won't say off-label, it was actually kind of on-label. Because it was a long-term issue, I did continue. I did go with the pre-made formulas on that just out of convenience, and mom was better about taking pills than anything else, as was my brother. I'm sorry, and I'm going to read this. That was affecting. So, yeah. And now IgE. Okay, cool. I'll get to that one, Christina. So the Shugan one, what I found was at the time I was using Mayway brand, and the dosage was 8 pills 3 times a day. And that sounds like a lot, except they're little tiny BBs, like literally they're the size of a BB. So I started both my mom and my brother on that about 15 minutes before meals that they would take 3 times a day and monitor how many episodes that they had. And both of them at around 10 to 12 pills 3 times a day ended up getting a complete ending of their esophageal constriction issues. I let them stay on it for about 2 weeks and then titrated them down to one needed 3 pills before meals and one needed 6 pills before meals. They did that for 6 months and then were able to stop completely and had no more repeat episodes of that. That was a long time ago. I've only occasionally treated it since then. One of the things I would probably encourage in a case of esophageal constriction is look for things like SIBO or low stomach acid are very common causes for that. And both my mom and my brother had yin deficiency, and the formula Shugan 1 is very drying. I didn't care. I gave it to him anyway. And so, although I yell about diagnosis to everybody, I used this for symptom suppression. I thought it was from chi stagnation. I was right. It was affecting their digestion. And so went ahead and used it. And they knew it was always handy, so I think they would continue to pop it maybe Thanksgiving, or if they were going to, if they were super stressed out, they would use it. But neither one has had to get the salad tongs or inject themselves with Botox, which I'm happy to say was a win on all of those. And Christina, I'm going to do my best to answer yours, even though I got a couple more in the queue, because it's an interesting one. And so this one, if you can't see it, secondhand smoke as a baby, and I'm guessing this is about you, and now has a host of allergies, also had exposure to secondhand smoke as an adult, which is super sucky. And there's not an easy answer. Yet there is. Secondhand smoke, the research tells us, is almost as bad as smoking yourself. Um, and one of the things that I'm going to just say chemical exposures, and I know them well because I deal with extra chemical exposures, smoking being full of a variety of chemicals that have been put into the tobacco, basically, um, has the tendency, of course, you can get emphysema, you can get COPD as a secondhand smoker. Your risk of lung cancer goes up. And so those are really crappy things that you shouldn't have to deal with. But the reality is that it's there. But it's very common for long term exposure to secondhand smoke or chemicals to see a weakened immune system. And you're seeing, obviously, your IgE, I think it was IgE, was not doing its job, and that's part of your immune system. Um, the MTHFR, and I don't remember what all that stands for other than the motherfucker gene. And so that's a genetic expression that could have happened in utero without a doubt. It is more common to see it as hereditary. Um, and so it challenges your body to utilize its B vitamins properly, and those are vital for the energy of your body and your detoxification, all of those kinds of things. So when we see the MTHFR, we're more likely to see autoimmune issues, ADD, ADHD, a whole slew of different issues. I when I first learned about it, I knew there were two genes that were specifically associated with the MTHFR, and now I believe there's three. And so how it manifested, of course, mattered on 1,000 things. But some people would have one turned off, two or three, and if you had all three turned off, you were extra screwed. Um, and if you've had that testing done, looking for, and there's any number of different products out there. I particularly, I won't say I love Methoprotect. It's an excellent product. It's expensive. That's the downside. Um, I find that a lot of times with the chronic allergies, I'm going to sound like a broken record on some of these today. With the chronic allergies, the chemical sensitivities, um, to look for, obviously, we usually go to the digestive system for that. I assume there's a lot of food sensitivities in there as well as just seasonal allergies and the chemical sensitivities. Um, Look for, you can do a SIBO test, SIBO, and small intestinal bowel overgrowth. It requires you to drink some sugar water and blow into a bag, and then they test the hydrogen or the methane that comes out of that. The treatment for that's kind of crappy. Hey, Annie. Um, but it's helpful to, if that's an issue, then that's got to be addressed first. The cause of SIBO, it can be anything from a lot of antibiotics or steroids, but long-term stress can also be a cause, and that shuts down your stomach acid production. So low HCl can be an issue, and it's funny. Certainly, taking HCl can be helpful, and I'm not suggesting you do that only because I don't know if that's your problem, but it is a common one. And so there isn't a test for low HCl. Sometimes the easiest test, see an herbalist, have them look at your tongue and go through your symptoms. But a lot of phlegm, a lot of belching, pain with eating, acid reflux can all be symptoms of low stomach acid. One of the big ways I differentiate low stomach acid from high is I find high stomach acid is fairly rare, but especially as we age. Here you've got like my genetics is messed up, my IgE is messed up, all of these things are suppressed, and all of a sudden they're like, but my acid is off the charts, and that's rarely true. If you get acid reflux when there's no food in your stomach, you may have high stomach acid. But if you get most of your acid reflux, belching, discomfort, distension when there's food in your belly, most likely, hey Rachel, most likely then you've got low stomach acid. It's not very nice, but the best tell is, okay. Oh, great question. So one of the best tells is take some HCl and see what happens. Take it with food. If you get no symptoms, like you're just like, I don't know, it didn't do anything, then you have low stomach acid. If you go, oh my God, this guy's an idiot, my face is on fire, my stomach is in pain, I was wrong. It's not low HCl. Um, and so sometimes it's the stomach acid's low. You're lucky if you came out negative on the SIBO test. Um, the problem is you probably don't need to detox so much as you need to repair what's broken there. And I'll take a little bit more Western approach on this one just to make it more approachable. Um, when we see the chronic sensitivities that, like, you're responding, water is causing inflammation, the immune system's not functioning, we look to the digestive system to have a huge impact on all of that. And so my favorite go-to for that is burdock root, and you can find that in any of the Asian markets. You can certainly buy it as a supplement, but I prefer it as a food. It's great in soups and stews. It's very good on working on the mast cells. You can also use, it combines really well with stinging nettle leaf. And that will help with the histamine responses of a variety of issues. And then trying to repair the gut, and you can certainly take a supplement of glutamine or something along those lines. But I actually find bone broth is a better choice, and you can throw all kinds of good herbs in there, because you're dealing with deficiencies overall, and you're getting symptoms that are caused from those deficiencies. It's more important to nourish than, and certainly any foods that are inflammatory, trying to avoid those is good. But really about building the body up, building your strength up, making sure you're getting nutrients. Oftentimes with that kind of low immune function, the food sensitivities will oftentimes see bowel dysregulation of either loose stools or alternating back and forth. Sometimes it's constipation. It just depends. Probiotics may be a part of that, but if probiotics make you worse, then your SIBO test was, I would actually say that's positive to SIBO if probiotics actually cause a flare-up. If your probiotics either have positive success or don't know anything, then I always recommend you rotate through your probiotic brands periodically. Like every 2 bottles or something, go through another one. And ideally use a different company just so that you're getting different strains. So bone broth, burdock, nettles. You can also, there's a category of herbs called alteratives. I'll see if I can spell that. Alteratives. I think I spelled that right. Which are herbs that help to normalize stuff. And I find that a lot of times when toxic exposure, things like that, alternatives do a really good job. Nice. All right. And so there's a variety of alternatives. One that's very gentle and yet effective is things like red clover. Personally, I would call burdock an alternative, but opinions vary on that. But kind of look through there and see what's sneaking through. And interesting that you have a nightshade sensitivity as well, because tobacco is a nightshade, and I think a lot of times people respond very badly to tobacco. You see the old Virginia farmers who were smoking since they were 2 and they're kicking around at 96 fine, and you have other people who die of lung cancer in their 20s, and I think that a lot of times those people who are challenged very young probably had an unknown nightshade family. I will remind you, most people don't know this, goji berries are a nightshade, and also ashwagandha, which is in most of your stress formulas, adrenal formulas, and so forth. So if you have a nightshade sensitivity that's noticeable, all the obvious, potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, make sure that you get the ashwagandha out of your supplements as well, and such a common additive. And not everybody who has a nightshade sensitivity will have an ashwagandha sensitivity, but enough to do that I just tell people just don't even try. the lousy thing is, 38 years with a smoker, and then, pre-birth, it's going to take a little while to fix it all. And so it's hard for, it's mean to say you have to have patience and work in the general direction. But none of that repairs quickly. And looking at just doing things to take care of that gut. Good job. Hey, Amanda. I want to blow up whoever owns your dock, by the way. That's another story. I was ranting in my car on the way over after I read your comment. The, uh, the, the reality is my generic answer, if you're generally on the right path, a month for every year you've been dealing with things. Yeah. Um, and with the breathing problems, it's funny. I know everybody talks about, um, oh my God, brain cramp. Uh, oh well, I'll think of it in a second. For this is one of those places where energetics and seeing an herbalist is really important. But when we look at the energetics in the lungs, those can be really dry or really wet. It can be difficult on the exhale or the inhale, exercise induced versus others. All of that can kind of help guide us a little bit on figuring out what's the best way to. And it's one of those things where sometimes it's like, no, I want to fix it, of course, but sometimes you also need relief. I generally like, specifically for breathing issues, cordyceps and reishi mushroom. Cordyceps being more moistening, reishi being more drying. Marshmallow leaf or root is also very moistening and soothing to irritated mucous membranes. Um, Cedar, which is a Florida native, can be really good. The aerial parts more moistening and specific for the lungs, but you can use the roots have ephedrine in them, which is good and bad. If you have blood pressure issues, anxiety, insomnia, you probably want to stay away from that. But for a short term, that can be really effective. Also, Biden's alba, our local Spanish needle here, is, and I would say any of the Biden species. Sorry, I'm typing this because not everybody knows this one. Um, is very effective for a variety of breathing issues, and I've had a number of people, and not to say you're a smoker, but literally you might as well have been a smoker at 38 years of secondhand smoke, and that one can be. I've seen the Biden's alba do a really good job because I consider it food. It's one that you can do a lot of and really helps to. I I don't think of Biden's as an alternative, but it does normalize the lung function quite a bit. And reishi, if you're dealing with repeated issues with bronchitis or something like that, that one's, I find that doing 6 months of reishi mushroom, if you're one of those folks who are getting uh, that bronchitis, a couple times a year, going through another round of antibiotics, that will usually fix it. You can also, and depending on where you are, I would see an herbalist, but a common formula that we use uh, for things like emphysema, and that formula usually has to be adjusted based on your energetics. But yeah, and it's sad, but never smoked. But if you were with us, if your significant other was a smoker for 38 years, you were getting about, slightly less than they were, but you were getting a lot of. Secondhand smoke is considered as bad as smoking. So for all practical purposes, you were a smoker from a treatment and symptom standpoint. Symptoms that you would want to avoid SIDA. Oh yeah, with SIDA, so SIDA SPA, so whether it's cordifolia, rhombofolia, and so forth. The aerial parts, the above ground parts are fine. You can use those as a snack, whatever. They're in the mallow family, so it's moistening. So just for general moistening of the lungs, any of the mucous membranes, it's a lovely trailside nibble. But the roots contain the ephedrine, and in the same way that if you were doing a steroidal ephedrine inhaler, if you were doing ma huang, the Chinese herb, Ephedrus chinensis, the Sida, although I'd say it's a lower risk than those other things, it is stimulating, so it's a bronchial dilator. It opens up your lungs so you can breathe better. It's moistening, so I consider that kind of protective because most ephedrine is drying. But if you've got high blood pressure, you need to use caution. If you have anxiety, insomnia, if you have tachycardia, rapid heartbeat, or an irregular heartbeat, you might want to be careful with the Sida because it's kind of like it's not caffeine in there, but it can be stimulating in the same way that caffeine can be. I know people who use it as an emergency inhaler, but does a better job if they've made good medicine with it. So general cautions that you would use with any kind of a stimulant of any sort. So that's a good one. And I will say emphysema, COPD, the reishi cordyceps, I consider those both very safe. They're mushrooms. I give them to people with chemotherapy and things like that. So I wouldn't think twice about doing that. You don't have to do a lot of research to make sure those are appropriate. Those will improve your oxygenation at the very least. So I'm sure if you've got emphysema and that much exposure to your lungs. Oh, mullein. That was what I was trying to think of. I know everybody recommends mullein for lung issues. I don't. Mullei's thought to be a yin nourishing, moistening to the lungs. I actually find it's an irritant to the lungs for a lot of people, and some of it's about how you make your medicine and so forth. Super appropriate to use, but I find probably 10% of the people actually start coughing from it, and that will clear the crap out of your lungs, but not a fun thing to do if you're already having challenges with that. If you do use it and make a tea, infuse it, strain it really well so there's no leftover debris, because it is, I believe, the hairs, that kind of soft furriness of the leaf. I believe that's actually what's causing the irritation for folks. It's super common when we're measuring out mullein for people at the clinic, that whoever's in the room at the time they won't cough a lot, but you'll get a cough or two out of that. All right. And Rick, I don't know if you're on here, but you had asked, and this is always a good one. And so I was like, oh, what can we do other than the usual stuff? Was asking about PSA, and so for men, the prostate gets enlarged. And one of the measurements for the health of the prostate is the PSA, or prostate-specific antigens. And what I always say, it's like, even if your prostate's fine, if it's a guy, they should get some blood work whenever they're doing their annual blood work. I don't care if you're in your 20s or 30s. It's good to get a baseline, so you kind of, you're very welcome. It's good to get that baseline so you can kind of see if there's change, because too often the PSA is not being used appropriately. So there's, with most blood work, they norm the entire country. And so if you get above X point, now you're at risk of prostate cancer, and they want to do all kinds of cool checks. And the reality is, any kind of a large increase in your PSA, I would say, would be cause to get some sort of check, certainly to be taking better care of it. So ideally, we're keeping it under 1, but it doesn't start to raise a red flag until it gets above 5, I believe. And so I think that's waiting too long. If you've been at a 3 or a 4 your whole life and it goes up to 5, I would say, whatever. But if you've been at 0.5 for the last 30 years and all of a sudden it jumps up to 3 or 4, that's a significant increase that I think should be used with caution. When we're looking at PSAs, it can be, there are a number of things that can raise the PSA that, oh man, I got to remember that list, that can artificially raise it that don't mean that there's anything wrong. Exercising vigorously prior to it, and that can be anything from running a marathon to lifting a lot of weights. I believe vitamin C, antihistamines, Yeah, there's another one or two medications out there. Sorry. I think Pepto actually. I think I read Pepto-Bismol can actually change it as well. And so if you get one bad set of numbers, don't necessarily panic. Make sure they retest it a few weeks later and double check and see what those substances are. They can give you an artificially high PSA test for a higher than normal, what we call BPH, benign prostate hyperplasia, where it's enlarged, it's causing, the guys will appreciate this, the women may or may not know it, but the dribbles. So they'll get a not strong stream of the urine or incomplete, that they'll finish peeing and then there's some dribbles. It's like, oh, wait, I got to pee some more. That's usually a prostate issue. If it's one of those things where that's probably a better tell if we see all of a sudden a frequently waking up at night to pee that may be on the large prostate. And it should get tested. Like, we can't assume that it's just a BPH. It could be prostate cancer. If there's pain associated with it, it might be prostatitis, where there's an infection in the prostate. All of those become more serious. The BPH in and of itself is pretty normal for men, especially as they're aging. You can get it at any age, but probably after the age of 40 or 50, it's almost assumed. The most common approach, of course, is saw palmetto berries. And one of the causes for the BPH is the failure to process the used testosterone. So we have free testosterone and the dihydrotestosterone, the used up testosterone, for lack of a better name. And so not processing that out well can cause the enlarged prostate. Saw palmetto is excellent for processing out the used up DHT, dihydrotestosterone, and that saw palmetto, the magic is literally getting good quality product. Too often I've opened up a prostate formula or a saw palmetto capsule and I taste it and it's like, it doesn't taste bad. And so if you've ever had a really good prostate or saw palmetto, it literally, not that I know what rotting soap or tastes like, but it literally tastes like a fermented rotten soap. It's absolutely disgusting and nauseating. Like, if you ate the berries of that when they were past ripe, it would probably make you puke and cause diarrhea sometimes. But that is my first line choice for enlarged prostate, elevated PSA. It's also saw palmetto. We often see that increased DHT for women who have PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I usually use the same prostate herbs for women with that higher DHT. You can use saw palmetto by itself, but I like to combine it with things like nettle root, and the root is more effective than the seed or the leaf. I would say the root can be combined with the leaf, especially if poor diet is figuring into that. From an energetic standpoint, an elevated PSA is phlegm, and usually stuck chi. The energy is stuck. For the Western herbalist, that's a tense condition. I frequently call it stagnant butt chi. So the saw palmetto, or excuse me, the nettle root and leaf can reduce some of the inflammation if it's poor food choices, which can have that impact. If you're on the all pizza and beer diet, that's very likely to get an enlarged prostate very quickly. Oddly enough, pumpkin seed is really helpful. And I would say sunflower and pumpkin seed both. The problem is most people, when they get pumpkin seeds, get that stuff in the plastic bag with like the crusted salt all over it because they're super salty yummy. Those probably do absolutely nothing. So actually getting unsalted will probably be more effective than those really intense, highly salted ones. There's an African herb, I believe it's African, called Pygeum. It's a bark of a tree that can be helpful. And there's two, if it starts to progress a little bit further, where you're starting to see some signs of heat, Maybe there's more discomfort, a more serious interrupted flow of urine, maybe some discharge, or even going so far where it's like, yeah, I got stage 1 prostate cancer. That would be an elevated PSA as well. The tocoro-yam, which is, I'll type that in there because nobody knows what I'm going to say. A Chinese herb called, oh, shiza, what just happened? Ah, these things scare me. She is helpful, and if it does progress to prostate cancer, there is an herb that is well researched for that, Dongling Sao, which is Rabidosia. I forget what species it is, but also a Chinese herb, obviously. That can be really a good one. Oh, yes, actually, I know how to fix that. All right, it's going to be a puppy night, looks like. Weak tendons. And that's a terrier. Okay. Cool. Making sure you're getting enough water, good quality essential fatty acids, whether those are seed oils or plant oils. Flaxseed is a good addition. Evening primrose oil is a good addition. A good way to check to see if you've got a good balance of essential fatty acids is checking the back of your arm. So on the tricep, checking back here, if it's bumpy, then you don't have enough essential fatty acids, and something like a fish or a plant oil can be really helpful. And very common. I also sometimes see, instead of the bumpies on the back of the arm, I'll see that on the top or the back of the thigh. And a couple of weeks of those good essential fatty acids will usually fix the bumpiness, and then that will start to reduce the inflammation overall in the body. Obviously, a diet high in veggies, I would say cooked veggies, lean meats, good quality meats, and the person who wrote this in, I know he gets nothing but good stuff. And avoiding the sugars and inflammatory fats can all be helpful. All right, let's talk. We got a good crowd on here. I like it. Ooh, you get some wild ones on here. I'm gonna run out of space. Keratosis. Why did that come up recently for something? Keratosis. I don't know. All right, let's do some puppy ones. I always like talking about the puppy dogs. So we got 2 puppy questions. We've got one that's a puppy dog, and by the way, all dogs are puppies for me. The fatty acids. Fish oil, of course, is a good one, but flaxseed and evening primrose, all are good essential fatty acids. I actually like a product called Udo's 369 that is a variety of different seed oils. That's usually my go-to, especially for somebody who's vegan, but I would actually say to use that in combination with fish oil is phenomenal, because that gets the whole range of different polysterols and other good essential fatty acid from different plants. They all seem to have different actions. So puppy dogs. So we got a 4.5-year-old shepherd mix that kind of gets stressed out around groups of people, and feel free to chime in if I miss anything on here. There's like holiday parties coming up and things like that, and we want that to be a happy dog, not a stressed dog. And they know stuff, so they made a really strong batch of chamomile to see if that would help. And I don't know. I don't know that I've ever seen I think of chamomile as almost getting you drunk if you do it strong enough. I was like, I don't know what that dog would look like if he was like, I'm still barking, but I can't stand up straight. I will say my favoriteest book on all things puppy dogs and cats, sorry, I don't want to neglect the cats, is a book called Four Paws, 5 Directions. And I know that sounds very Chinese, because it is. And you can find, if you can't find it, there's a link on the Traditions Herb School website as well. Um, but that book does look through the lens of Chinese medicine, uses herbs from both Chinese medicine but also Western herbal medicine and nutraceuticals. It looks at acupressure for it. Um, those are the two biggies, and fish oil, of course, is the easiest ones to get it from. So anything in there can be really helpful, but the the it didn't sound like the dog got mean, just stressed out. And so it's always hard to do like energetic, it's not hard, it's actually pretty easy to do energetic diagnostics on dogs. So a dog that's barking vicious, then we say that's a livery dog. But one that's more stressed out from an anxiety is like backing up and barking kind of thing, is more likely to be an anxiety, or not your real heart, but your cool energetic heart. Um, and so things that are, well, I got to ask weird questions. Really thin dog or like meaty?
She's like the perfect weight.
Perfect.
And I did notice she was digging in the dirt and laying in it today, so I'm thinking
Ah,
she's
okay.
hot.
So is runs hot. So that was a good observation that the dog tends to like was digging a hole in the dirt and then laying in it. That's a sign, the dog that lays in the bathroom tile floor, the kitchen floor, that dog runs hot. One that's always under the covers or on your lap tends to run cold, and that helps us decide some of our stuff. Um, so usually dogs need to be nourished. Um, and so those nourishing nervines can be super helpful. Milky oats is a big winner for puppy dogs. Um, they also have, and I got to quiz a little bit before we started the forum, that thunderstorms don't really, I mean, we all jump in a thunderstorm, but not the way some dogs are like cowering under the bed kind of thing. But loud noises will sometimes cause a little barking response, but it was really just crowds. And then really important to also recognize when we're looking at dogs in particular, but any critter. I asked whether, like, is it just dudes that she's barking at, or is it both men and women? And so it was both. And unfortunately, fortunate this dog was a rescue, so came to a good family. But the reality is too often, especially in the case of rescues, that they've been abused by in some form or fashion by a man. And so a lot of them have a very negative response to strange men or large groups of men. And so ruling that out is always important. In this case, the dog was kind of like, I just don't like crowds and there's too many people in here. It doesn't matter what gender they are. And so that literally goes more towards just kind of a situational anxiety disorder. And using things like the milky oats can be good. So we don't have to sedate. Like you can use, they make cannabis. Hey, Julie, they do make cannabis doggy treats. Those can be super helpful. Um, the making sure they're fed beforehand can be helpful, so that they're not feeling like you know, dogs are still wild animals, even though they're lovely wild animals. They can get protective around food, and so making sure they're fed ahead of time is really helpful. Milky oats, I like wood betony. That's slightly cooling, um, and a nice nervine adaptogen. Uh, what other good ones are there? No, not catnip doesn't work on dogs the way it does on cats. Unfortunately, because that would be really easy. Nothing wrong with catnip. It still is a nervine carminative. Um, but where cats, it's narcotic. It doesn't have that effect. Um, Oddly enough, valerian and catnip have very similar actions for cats, which is kind of cool. Um, the You could use, like, if you wanted to, like, all right, I want some doggy downers here. Something like California poppy, even though we're not treating pain, is somewhat narcotic. Even though it's not a poppy, you're not going to get the constipation or anything like that from it. That ought to work. The trick is dosing. I think you said 60 something pounds. So you're going to give like 2/3 of a human dose with that. You know.
I always feel like excessively heavy.
Okay, good. Like that's
Like
usually
that.
correct. Yeah, most people underdose and don't get any effects because, like, I waved it over their food. That doesn't work. And also, uh, the flower essences are great. You know, and just Rescue Remedy is the easiest one to get. They actually have dog-specific ones that can be put into their food or into a treat. Can be put into a cannabis thing. So that with flower essences in general, but Remedy especially, because those are all homeopathic remedies rather than herbal. And rather than giving a high dose, you're better off doing a frequent dose. So you're not wrong to give a dosage of Rescue Remedy every 5 minutes at the start of an event or something. Um, Always being cognizant of, music's too loud. People, aren't too often people get a cocktail in them and they're no longer respectful of like eye contact with dogs. They're just going up and grabbing the dog instead of, so that's the downside of parties.
That's why I hardly ever do parties.
Yeah, sometimes get the dog fed and put them in the other room works too, but dogs should be allowed to socialize as well. You don't want to isolate them.
I did that one time and she just like
Barked
freaked
endless.
out the whole time.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
Yeah,
trying to just find a happy medium.
and there's little things too. Sometimes nervine for the dog, nervine for the mom, because they might be responding to your understanding of certain people and things like that. And making sure that just like you would introduce children or a friend, introducing your dog to people as they come in is because that is part of the family and that's their house as well. That can really help a lot. I should be a dog psychologist sometimes, I think. All right, it's 7 o'clock, so we got another hour of this craziness, and I got all kinds of good stuff on the list. I got some interesting ones. And I always stop in the middle and give my station identification. If you don't know it, I'm Bob Linde. I'm an acupuncture physician and a registered herbalist here in St. Petersburg, Florida. And I have a multi-practitioner or multi-modality practice, acupuncture and herbal therapies, on Central and 25th here in St. Pete. You can find out more at acuherbals1c.com. And we've got a Tradition School of Herbal Studies where we have a couple of awesome people teaching besides myself. And with Tradition School of Herbal Studies, you can find out more at traditionsherbschool.com, where we have a Western herbal program all the way from beginner to practitioner to include clinical practice, as well as a Chinese herb program that starts tomorrow. You still have time to sign up. It's not too late. The Chinese program is also 2 years. The last year and a half is with clinical practice. And as well as lots of cool standalone classes in both Ayurvedic and Western herbal medicine and some spiritual classes. And we've got a teaching garden here at the school, primarily with bioregional plants. The programs themselves, the Western program focuses on our Florida, Caribbean, Central South American plants. And 3 nights a week we have intern clinics, so people can get low-cost access to herbs and acupuncture. I supervise acupuncture interns on Monday nights. Actually, on Wednesday night I have one. And Western herbal students are getting practice on Tuesday nights, and Chinese students on Wednesday nights. You definitely need to get an appointment. They fill up fast, especially because I took 2 weeks off and ran away to the American Herbalist Guild Conference. And we have a full apothecary there where you can come in. If you come in and say, hey, I've got esophageal reflux, we're going to say make an appointment. If you go, hey, I want some chamomile, we've got over 800 herbs, probably the largest apothecary here in Florida, and we're in the process of adding in the bioregional plants. So all the cool plants I talk about all the time that are local, we're going to actually have about 50 of them on the shelf available as well. We've also got for our students and graduates, we have a rotating, I think we have 3 product lines from our students that we rotate every month that they're being showcased. So it's always great to support our local herbalists. We've got so many in the area. So always check out that stuff in the one room. And nobody actually knows that we have a plant nursery in the back with all medicinal plants that I've grown and grow either here at the school or at my yard at home. so that people can start to grow their own food and medicine in their yards and make all of these people obsolete. All right. And if you're just showing up, feel free to put a question up here and let us know who you are, where you're from, whatever. I always think it's cool, and I challenge anybody to beat Anne that she's hanging out in Ecuador right now. Is Timo there? All right, let's see. Who do I got? I've lost track of these. Oh, let's get yours. Tabitha, you're hanging out there. So this is a little Chinesey and a little poopy, a little Chinesey. So it's one of the hardest things for people to wrap around, is the idea that we usually talk about the whole constitution of an individual. And the reality in Chinese medicine, we actually parse it out a little bit. And so, yes, we look at the whole energetics, constitution of somebody. We look at their entire life, from actually in utero forward. Sometimes even beyond that, because we look at like how many kids have you got, where did you grow up, blah blah blah. So when we get what seems to be conflicting symptoms, in this case, she asked about mucus in the poop, right? So kind of some phlegm in the bowel movement, which is, I won't say common, but like that's pretty easy to understand. We see the mucus, therefore we assume there's phlegm. And that could come from diet, irritants, any number of different things. But with yin deficiency, and yin deficiency, for those of you who don't know crazy Chinese talk, is a lack of the cooling, moistening properties of the body. And that yin deficiency, A is deficient, so there's usually fatigue associated. We'll see a red tongue with cracks in it oftentimes, and it will show up as dry and intermittently hot. They might have things like a malar flush, like right here, redness. They might have night sweats, hot flashes. They may have heat in their hands and feet, and in the extreme center of the chest. And they'll have a tendency to have a dry, crumbly stool tending towards constipation. And so the idea that we have phlegm and all of these dry symptoms, and I'm guessing, Tabitha, feel free to chime in, that they're tending towards loose stools. And so I could say, boring things like they may have autoimmune bowel disorder like IBS or ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. And so that could certainly be true. Not wrong to have them get tested on that. But when we look at this, when we look at the bowel movements themselves, that's indicative of the large intestine, the digestive system as a whole, and in Chinese we would actually say the lung. Yin deficiency can be any number of different so there's qi deficiency there as well. So the reality is, if it's a woman, we might see that they've gone into menopause and have qi and yin deficiency. So the loose stools indicating a lax, deficient, failure to process their food. So it's coming out a little loose, undigested with some mucus, poor food choices, food sensitivities, any of those are a possibility. But either overall constitution tending towards that deficient, dry, hot, or a specific organ. So they could have stomach yin deficiency that doesn't allow them to process, so it's a hot, dry stomach, and so things are going through and not coming out right there. It could be liver yin deficiency, which might be more menopause kind of symptoms, or history of drinking or certain medications could lead to that, or a heart yin deficiency where there's insomnia, heart palpitations, anxiety disorder, and what did I miss? Oh, lung yin deficiency if they were a smoker or used an inhaler a lot as a kid. So it would not be surprising to see both. If it's every bowel movement, I would definitely look to food sensitivities. My favorite quote, "What's your favorite food? It's that it's killing you." And there could also be get some blood work to see if there's an autoimmune disorder like ulcerative colitis going on. Um, they might want to get, if it's a new symptom, they might want to actually get a colonoscopy. Um, Also, if there's been any change in medications or environment, that there's new environmental irritant that's coming up. Recent round of antibiotics could also cause that, since antibiotics can actually cause ulcerative colitis and all kinds of other fun stuff. Um, but the hardest part then is treating it, because if we give these cool, moistening, nourishing herbs for the yin, then we make the poop worse. And there's never an easy answer to this. So, looking at diet and lifestyle is usually the first choice. Um, Creating the finding where's the yin deficiency, what organ is most likely affected, will be huge. And sometimes the formula Bazin 1, which is also known as women's precious. It is not limited to women too. Yeah. I can't spell. All right, women's precious. I'm not even going to try to type it. And what you usually do, because there is some phlegm there, so it's basically made up of two formulas. It's easier to do in Chinese. The Tong, also known as Four Gentlemen, and Si Wu Tong, which is known as Four Substances. Four Gentlemen is made up of ginseng, poria mushroom, atractalodes, and honey fried licorice. Si Wu Tong is Romania, white peony, Angelica Dongguai, and something else I can't think of. Xuancheng Ligustricum root. And so the trick to that is you have it nourishing the qi to address the loose stools, you have it nourishing blood and yin with the siwu tong, but the problem is it's not helping with the mucus. So you might have to add things like astragalus, huang qi, increase the fu ling, maybe add in the polypore, zuling, which preserves the yin but also drains damp. And ultimately, probably a couple of good rounds of probiotics would go a long way. No, Western and Chinese herbs are totally fine to use together, and oddly, Solomon seal is a Chinese herb. We have two different species of Solomon seal, Amanda. One of them should not be used in replacement of American Solomon seal, but the one called Huang Jing can be used, and I think works as well, if not better, than the American Solomon seal. The other one, I believe, is Yu Zhu, which do not use that one. So that's my generic answer. It does not have any of the actions of the American Solomon seal. The Huang Jing is a one-for-one replacement, if not better. But that one I would say is probably too moistening. In this case, we need to clear that phlegm up a little bit. And you could try things like stinging nettles. But yeah, Amanda, one of the fun things is when you start to look at Latin names in the Chinese and Western herbs, they're the same. I would say about at least a quarter of the Chinese herbs are also Western. Dandelion, burdock, plantain, horsetail, ginseng, astragalus, angelica, ligustricum, ginkgo, gotu kola, rhodiola. Those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head. They're all Western and Chinese. Sometimes they're using a different species, but with similar, if not the same, indications, which is actually kind of fun, because knowing the Western medica and the way we approach things from the Western allows us, and the same, like I know both, and so the Chinese may have an indication we don't know in Western, and the Western will have indications we don't know in Chinese. So if we cross-pollinate our understanding about them, we can expand our use of either system. And so I find that allows for us to do so much more. And a lot of our tropical plants too, cat's claw, one of the gato is gotung, and identical uses. Um, Daughter seed, which is love vine here in the tropics, is tsz. Yeah, say that 3 times fast. So there's so many tropical plants. Bidens is in the Chinese medica. So it's shocking when you start to play with the Latin names. Or actually, the Chinese beautyberry, which is Calicarpia sinensis, I think I'm guessing at that, is got the same indications as our American beautyberry, the Calicarpia americana. So really kind of fun how I'm special. I get to play in both worlds. It really makes it a lot of fun. And I hate to say it, it's a lot of experimentation as well. All right, I do want to get the other puppy dog in there. Sorry, my ADD is kicking in. I was working on slides for my class tomorrow, and I'm like, oh my God, brain's in 10 different places simultaneously. And speaking of, I don't think you were referring to the dog when you spoke of Solomon seal, but Pickles wrote that she's got a new puppy dog and an American Terrier. Um, Oh, you guys are gonna make me think now. Hey, Sean, I think I've seen you on here before. Um, the One of my favorite approaches. It's a congenital disorder that causes the dog's paws to rotate in, and they end up horribly bow-legged, and all kinds of yucky problems. That the vets go, suck it up, put them down if they can't walk, whatever. I find Solomon seal fixes that in a couple of weeks. And Western or Chinese, either the Huangjing or just the regular Polygonum Solomon seal. Uh, the Chinese one, because it's steamed, and I think it's got a little honey on it, the dogs really like it. You can literally just throw it in their food, but either one's fine. Literally, I've had 3 dogs that were told, suck it up, we'll put the dog down soon. Um, oh, then even better that, if he's running hot, the Solomon seal is a great addition. Um, and you could also, if you wanted to be weird, make it more exciting. You could also add gotu kola, which is Centella asiatica, or or erectus. It doesn't matter which one you use. Oh, so many questions. I'm gonna have to scroll back. Let me finish Pickles. But the gotu kola is specific for connective tissue disorders and reduces inflammation. So maybe a 2-to-1 Solomon seal to gotu kola would probably do really well. Um, so yeah, 76-pound dog, I'd give him, start him with a teaspoon to a tablespoon, depending on how big and hungry he is. Start him with once a day, then crank it up to twice a day. And if you end up doing at that weight, yeah, like, I don't know, 76 pounds, I wouldn't think twice about it. Oh, yeah, that's right. That was your puppy the first time I used that. I totally forgot about that. Yeah, so I've had good success with that since then as well. All right, there was a kitty cat up here. So yeah, that was an easy one, Pickles. We got that. So it's really important, and I say that, of course, not everybody knows. Solomon seal has a super yummy Western or Chinese. Although it's hard to grow here in Florida, it is very common as you move into the southeast and all the way up into Canada. Um, but it is specific for nourishing and strengthening tendons. So anything from a tendon injury to inflexible tendons, it's just phenomenal. And so in this case, it's like a tendon that's getting out of whack. So throw some Solomon seal at it, and I want to say it's worked almost every time. And tendons in Chinese medicine are controlled by the liver. So things that are good for the liver can be helpful just in general as well. And I think I saw in there, it was a street dog that you rescued yourself, so maybe hasn't gone through the ASPCA or any of those folks. Um, probably eaten some really lousy things. You might throw a little burdock or dandelion in, make sure the gut's healthy. And I don't know, I'm on a red clover kick lately. It wouldn't be wrong to throw some red clover in there as well. Kitty cat problems. I had a flame point Siamese with genetic respiratory deficiency, regular clear discharge, went deeper into the lungs and more profuse. Oh, fun stuff. Difficult to expectorate. At the worst stage was giving. Oh, okay. Ningsolon didn't seem to put a dent in it. Any suggestions? Well, that sucks. Boy, so for all of you who don't know, I don't remember all the ingredients in Ningsolon, but that was a good choice. It's funny. Obviously, so he knows stuff. So so when we're looking, whether it's human or animals, part of the energetic diagnosis is looking at things, excretions, and so whether that's the poop or the phlegm coming out of a nose or a lung and so forth. So when it was clear, we say that that's either a cold or just a generic deficiency usually. Once it starts to get yellow, green, smelly, where basically things are heating up. So, imagine if you left some cream of mushroom soup out on the stove for too long. At some point it starts to get furry and gross. So there's any number of things like looking at the food specifically. I find so many of the cat and dog issues are from vet recommended foods. I feel bad saying that. Sometimes they're appropriate, sometimes they're not. Too many of the cat foods in particular are just loaded with grains that are too much for them and cause some of those kind of chronic respiratory issues, or just poor quality. And so sometimes that's just rough. Looking at in the earlier stages, something like stinging nettles and burdock would have been appropriate. I do use mushrooms sometimes for cats. You just have to make sure that it's processed well. Mushrooms don't break down well in the stomach or in the intestines of cats, so it has to be extracted and then added. So do a water extraction of it would have been correct. And then I always feel like a broken record sometimes. The Bidens would have been a good choice because that actually clears heat and is so lung specific. Also, Chinese Zihua Diding, which is wild violet. And so wild violet is cold and moistening and one that's very easy to find down here. And because it sounds like there was a lot of phlegm, especially as we started to see those later stages where the poor thing was struggling, you might have had to add in some of the Huang's things that contain berberine. Sorry, I'm translating for different people here as we say that. So Huang Qin would have been a good one for that damp heat in the upper jiao. Or golden seal would have been a great choice in a case like this as well. And I say that as long as the kidney function was okay. At some point, if the kidney function, I'm sure, started to crap out, it would have been more challenging. I said reishi I really like for just the function and oxygenation of the blood, and so obviously some kind of lung fluid congestion like that is always rough. And from a Chinese perspective, when the heart or lungs start to go, always look to the kidney, in this case because it was congenital, genetic, to strengthen the kidneys and to help with the inhale as well as the immune system can be really effective. I will say I like David Winston's formula, the kidney formula. It's like kidney support, but it's the one that has stinging nettle seed in it. And it's based on Lu Wei Di Huang Wan, the Six Flavors Romania. And he adds in astragalus, cordyceps, and the the seeds of the stinging nettle. One of my favorite ways to improve kidney function from a physical standpoint, but from an energetic standpoint, obviously that would also help with that. And Rachel, sorry, I'm catching up now. Pumpkin seed is a dewormer or preventer for worms. I know it's technically that. It's actually more about the shells of it that are slicing the critters. There's nothing wrong with adding pumpkin seed to a puppy dog or a human. But I find there's better things for intestinal worms. The epazote, I actually is one of my go-tos since pinworms are super common on puppy dogs. Epazote is a Florida native, and it's a digestive spice, and can be used on humans, dogs, cats, horses, and so forth. Da-da-da. All right, I'm going to catch up now. Good, yeah. All of it. Well, oh, that's funny. Oops. Oh, I may have messed up. So it's in here somewhere. Oh, I see what's wrong. Ah. Dogs' stomach digest mushroom better than cats. No, dogs. So any of your more carnivore animals have a shorter digestive systems, and oh boy, hopefully all of those came through. I'm not positive. All right, I think all of that came through. So all of those more carnivore animals with a shorter digestive tract are challenged to break down harder to digest things. Mushrooms, even in humans, we have a longer digestive tract for our body size. Have to be cooked. If you like, I love me some raw button mushrooms in a salad. The reality is you're just pooping it out the other side. And so mushrooms have to be cooked in order to break down some of that chitin on the outside. And the longer you cook it, the better. So I would say for an animal, a carnivore in particular, making sure that we process that as much as humanly possible will be really beneficial. Rick, I didn't know whether you were here or not. You missed it. You have to listen to the recording. It was like 45 minutes ago. I did a whole PSA, blah, 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 prostate thing. So for, I don't know, I saw this in here somewhere. Da, 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 da. Somebody asked about, for heartworms. So, sorry, the last name fooled me. So heartworms are a trick. So because those are a bloodborne parasite that end up, if critter ends up with heartworms, ends up in the heart, they start to sprout and can actually kill an animal. I always get worried if you don't know it, one of the, yes, send them to the vet. They can do a blood draw, see if, especially for strays and things like that. If they haven't been tested for heartworm, it's always good to have them tested. One of the unfortunate symptoms that a lot of people don't know about heartworm is a unexplained weak cough is a symptom of they're already in the heart. There's great debate. Is it a good idea to, if they have heartworm, if they're bad enough, it will actually kill the animal to treat them. So catching it early is really important. I will say that I worked on a heartworm formula a while back. And it's one of those things when we're talking about parasites, it's so hard because every parasite has its own unique life cycle, and the way that it stays in the body, and our approach has to vary both on how the parasite is reproducing. We have to be able to get the medicine to them where they are. And so intestinal parasites like pinworms, honestly, they're a pain, but they're the easiest ones to address. We eat the food in some form or fashion, it hits them, and we can go and Google what their life cycle is and dose so that we're catching the new emergence as they come out of the body. If we're going after something like a tapeworm that's actually clumped onto the intestinal wall, we have to not just use some irritant like cayenne pepper. We actually have to get them to let go. And so I'll use things like kava or Jamaican dogwood and also then put irritants, things like clove and epazote, black walnut, all of those kinds of things can be used. But when we have one that's in the bloodstream, that's acting differently. So you can do all of the cayenne pepper you want and all of that. If those chemicals aren't making it, they have to be processed through the liver, absorbed through the intestinal wall, blah, blah, blah. Or I guess pass through the intestinal wall, then the liver. So we're not necessarily getting those chemicals to the place that it needs to be a lot of times. So one of the things I looked at when I was formulating for heartworm was, what do we do for other bloodborne parasites? And heartworm is kind of a unique booger. So one of the other common bloodborne parasites are malaria. And so we have things like dengue fever, malaria, that are a spirochete, which is a kind of a weirdo. And oh, that's interesting. Hongqi, Rishi. Well, wild. So I used the herbs like danshen, which is salvia mitts, sweet Annie, which is Qinghao, and honestly, I don't remember the other things I used. That's really interesting. Boho Fengqi, Rishi, the rosemary. Actually, everybody forgets that that's actually any of your aromatic herbs in the boho. You must have used a lot of black walnut to get them in there. That's awesome. But the danshen and Qinghao are both used, and a bunch of other things are used for any of those spirochete bloodborne diseases. But I used that to take the formula into the circulatory system to good success. I was treating cats in general, but ended up treating, doing the same thing, different formula. I can't keep them all straight. Different animal. All right, Dan. Talk to you later. Oh, that's good. Good job. How am I doing on time? All right. What have I not gotten to? I'll make sure I got everything that people emailed to me as well. So actually, I do want to address that, Kristen. Man, I gotta catch up. So, cholesterol is an interesting thing. So the Chinese, we talk about invisible cholesterol and things like that. Nice. Um, Cholesterol is a type of phlegm, and we see there's two reasons primarily we see cholesterol. Poor food choices, but that's not the only reason. Damage to the circulatory system, frequently done by inflammation, and so we see people who have elevated blood sugar. It creates inflammation in the body. They end up with more cholesterol. People who are smokers end up with more cholesterol. The rancid fats, too many animal fats, we see that causes inflammation sometimes. So many reasons why people can get an inflammatory response in their circulatory system. The body repairs that by producing plaque, which is cholesterol. And I'm not a big fan of, as I watch my language in here, I'm not a fan of statin drugs. There's a time and a place for everything. You start hitting in the 800s on your total cholesterol, that might be a time for a statin drug. And there is fancier testing that can be done on the types of LDL. If there's triglycerides, which isn't particularly good for anybody. There's HDL, the high density lipoproteins, but easier to say happy cholesterol. So that's the good stuff. We want high HDL. LDL is the lousy cholesterol or low density lipoproteins. And VLDL is the very low density or very lousy cholesterol. So there are multitude of different types of LDLs and VLDLs, and different ones respond to different things. And so when we Look at food can have, changing your diet can have a benefit. Taking statin drugs actually works on very well on two types of LDL. Exercise can work, food can work, fish oils can work, um, and then certain herbs can be really effective. And this is a Bob belief. Berberine is an alkaloid that's extracted from certain plants like golden seal, huanglian, and so forth. And I'm not a fan of doing chemical extracts. And so berberine, although it's not a harmful one, it's still no longer plant medicine. It's a chemical extraction of it. In the same way that coca plants in South America are actually great. Cocaine, crack, not so hot. Opium, poppy, the sap carried out of those is great for chronic diarrhea and has some help for chronic painful cough. Heroin, last time I checked, is not a good alkaloid to extract from that plant, that it has negative side effects. So, berberine being a chemical alkaloid extraction, it's very dry and very cold. Um, yeah, no, yeah. I know foods are the hardest one to work with because not everybody's got the time to create cool foods. So yes, berberine would work, but it's drying, and it's also because of the bitter nature of the berberine, stimulating to the liver, where a lot of the cholesterol is produced. Um, and so short term, I would say berberine's probably fine, but I would say energetically, it may or may not be correct. If you see a lot of heat and a lot of phlegm, then it's probably an okay choice short term, but looking at the whole herb or combination of herbs is better. I've mentioned golden seal a couple of times. I discourage the use of golden seal except for extreme cases like that kitty cat. That would have been super appropriate then. If you're looking at long term use, choosing things like the Chinese coptis, huanglian, or Oregon grapefruit or yellow root, something along those lines. Yeah, I spelled that right. Are usually better ways to go with all of it. Um, mm, I don't want to skip this one. We only got a few minutes left. All right, good. So recently I was on a thread. I hate to say it, on Facebook, and I usually restrain myself. But somebody I knew wasn't in my area, was dealing with a fairly rare type of cancer, and basically posted, and shared with folks about his cancer and his fears and why he was making some of the choices. He had choices between chemo and some kind of bone marrow transplant and some other, all of it's scary. And he was going with the chemo. And after some actual friends offered, prayers and offers of, I'll bring some food by kind of thing, then a bunch of people jumped on with all of this health advice. And I'm pretty sure he didn't ask for any health advice. And most of the health advice was horrid and was probably going to kill him. And I chimed in and said, please find an herbalist and don't take any of these people's advice because they were saying things like, oh, just start juicing, that cures all cancer. Just smoke a lot of weed, that cures all cancer. And they were not taking into account, they know nothing about this individual, but they also know nothing about the chemotherapy he's doing. And so one of my greatest concerns is when people put that advice out, A, they're not trained in any of it, and B, juicing vegetables that are generally good for you while you're doing chemotherapy is likely to completely negate the benefits of chemotherapy. And nobody wants to do chemo, but we're seeing more and more beneficial results. And yep, lots of horrible side effects, but most of us, when we say chemo, we think 1950s chemo. It's gotten better. And so it's not as horrible of side effects. Many people are able to work through their chemotherapy, especially if they're supported with things like herbs, but it has to be the right herbs. If you ever read any or watch any of my lectures on herb drug interactions when you're doing something that's a narrow therapeutic margin, i.e., don't do too much, don't do enough. Juicing is never indicated. It will push out the medication very quickly, in which case it doesn't do any good. And so bitter and sour things should not be taken in therapeutic dosage while you're going through chemo. Eating lots of food, bone broth, getting through the chemo as effectively as you can is always a better choice. And making sure that you're not taking TikTok videos or pop advice from people who are trained in nothing other than Google when you're going through a serious medical procedure like that. And people at their worst sometimes grasp at straws, and things like juicing sounds great, and that's fine. I have my own opinions about juicing. That generally eating your vegetables is preferable. Fiber is important, and so a lot of times putting things through the juicer gives you unnatural amounts of stuff without the fiber in particular. So purple corn or the corn smut, which is like a fungus that grows on the corn. So that's really interesting. I wish I could say I know a lot, and I enjoy the purple corn chips, but I would question that. The corn silk is a well-known herb. The corn smut is both a spiritual herb as well as a medicinal herb, but actual corn, and I know corn flour, which is not as in make a cake out of it, but actually the flour is not from the corn plant. But I don't know purple corn. For high blood pressure, I would be concerned with the sugar content of it because it is yummy. I've never heard of making a tea from it, so that's a new one. And I would make sure that they're like corn kernels. It would just be odd. This is mean to say, check to see who funded the thing and see if it's been repeated, or if there's a long traditional use for it. If there's a long traditional use, then I'd be like, oh yeah. There was a interesting one of the lectures at HG, and I think the world of Thomas Easley. He's an herbalist and has an herb school. I think he's a really smart dude. I always learn something when I take a class with him. Very functional medicine in his approach. Not a big fan of energetics, and he taught a class in energetics without the woo. And I showed up for the class just kind of like not sure where he was going to go with it. And he's not a big fan of some of the spiritual aspects that we talk about sometimes with plants and so forth. And I talked to one of his other people who teaches at his school, who was actually next to us in the booth. And I was like, I disagreed with basically everything Thomas said in that class, but doesn't mean I don't respect him 1,000%, and had a lot of fun with him over the years. But my criteria sometimes isn't whether or not we can have some some research to back it up or not back it up, but looking for double-blind placebo-controlled studies or 500 years of history. Those are always there's always new stuff coming out, and if it's not rooted in a specific culture's traditions, then we need good, repeatable science to back it up. And so something like corn, it's like, no, corn is a spiritual plant. It is of the Americas, and the corn, there's so many varieties of corn. It's a grass that has been over 10,000 years made to produce this wonderful fruit that I like a lot. And there are parts of the corn plant, the silk in particular, has great diuretic effects. I would say actually the corn itself does, and so maybe the purple corn is lower in sugar. The starchiness of it might be decent, and I don't know if it is a tradition for that, and that doesn't mean it's not true. So it's always the trick. There's so many things out there that sometimes sound good, sound right, and it gets lost in the translation a lot of times. And so every time there's a new product or a new superfood and so forth, is making sure that we're like, what culture did it come from? How is it understood in that culture? And then see if we can translate that into some of our modern things. And the cat's claw is a good example of that. Oh, from a color standpoint, oh, okay, I could see that. The purple being like reddish. Interesting idea. The cat's claw, if we Google it, it's going to be this miracle antiviral and antimicrobial, and we can use it for HIV and all this other cool stuff. But when we look at it through what the traditional cultures used it for, and the cat's claw, the Uncarias, the Chinese know it as goteng. In Una de Gato in South America, and what they actually talk about is more for internal wind, seizures, it's cooling, and it's funny. So when I start to look at the traditional cultural uses of it, I was like, oh, this matches internal wind and fire from the Chinese. That's super cool. And I recently was able to actually get the plant and start growing it and propagating it. And when I tasted it, it completely changed my understanding of it. And so now I know it as a moistening, mineralizing, grounding plant. And so it may have antimicrobial properties, but we need to see a deficiency associated with it. And I will say, cat's claw got really popular with the AIDS epidemic. And so when we look at that acquired immune deficiency syndrome, it is a deficiency that frequently showed up as yin deficiency or that deficient heat, which case cat's claw is probably a great choice because of its moistening, nourishing, and happen to, in modern science, also have some antiviral, antimicrobial properties to it. So super interesting. All right, I did that. Bioregional. I will put this out also. I talked about the herb walk I did down in Sarasota Wednesday. Yeah, that was only 2 days ago. That's horrifying. And one of the things, it was always interesting. It was a new place. Yeah, Rick, I think we have some propagated up. I know I sold a couple of them. I'm not sure how it would do up by you unless you got a greenhouse, in which case it would do great. So it was interesting, a new park, and I, didn't have a lot of plants in it. So I ended up talking about some of the spiritual uses of the plants, which I don't always, jump on that first thing. But there was some cedar growing out there, and there was some groundsel growing out there, and actually willow that has both medicinal and so forth. Oh, heck yeah, you do. And one of the things that, and I was surprised, it was a crowd I didn't know. I only knew like 2 or 3 of the people there. And I'm never sure how I come across when I talk about the importance of using the bioregional plants, and especially for spiritual uses. And we've all probably done it where you buy a smudge stick of desert sage that comes from out west, and we use that to clean a space, cleanse a space, get rid of the negative energy, however we want to say it. And the problem is it's been horribly over-harvested, and it grows in a very limited area, and it is part of the traditional culture of many of those western, southwest and desert indigenous people there. And they can't find it to practice their religious practices. And so there has been a movement away from using that. I think basically once it showed up in Walmart that it was like, all right, we need to stop doing this. And it's important to recognize that every culture uses smudge. And so smudge is just saying we burn plants in order to do stuff, and specifically for religious ceremonies. And if you look at some of the Asian cultures, they burn incense. That's smudge. If we look at some of the Judeo-Christian groups, they burn frankincense and myrrh and light candles. That's smudge. And if we think about burning frankincense and myrrh or other similar plants at the start and end of certain Christian ceremonies, it's literally cleaning the space to create purity, to bring about a state of bliss. That's just normal. And so we need to recognize that there are plants that grow here in Florida or wherever you are, and and you're down in Ecuador, where I know you know Palo Santos, and so many. That's like we're not limited to that plant. There's so many other great plants that are used for smudge and ceremony down there. And cedar and pine are the two that grow most prolifically here in Florida. Cedar in particular is used in the same way that sage is to start and stop ceremonies, to both clear and fill a space. Also, there is a plant, a tree that grows here that unfortunately a lot of people don't like to grow. I've got 3 growing now. They're not big enough to harvest yet. Linde vitae. I think I spelled that right. It is also known as the Northern Palo Santos, or spiritual wood, and also limbo. There we go. All right, Rick. Yeah, it'll be on YouTube for anybody who has to run. This will be on YouTube sometime soon. We'll see whether I get it up today or tomorrow night. But I usually try to get it up there pretty fast. And you can hear all the ones that I've done for the last 2 years or some craziness like that. Gumbo limbo is actually a relative of frankincense. It's a Bursera, grows very well. I'm going to claim that I have the northernmost gumbo limbo, but for anybody south of St. Pete, for sure you can grow it. Inland, like Arcadia, you might have some problems. Tabitha, I don't know if you've tried to grow gumbo limbo there yet. It likes coastal climes. It likes salt water. Well, you're on a boat, Amanda. That doesn't count. You might find gumbo limbo where you're where you're docked. But it's a very, very common coastal plant. And so in one of my other permutations of Bob, I was a treasure hunter, where I looked for buried pirate treasure. And one of the trees we always looked for was gumbo limbo. It's also known as tourist tree, sunburn tree, and so forth. Yeah. So it is one that I was constantly looking for, because it was where people would carve their initials on there, but it's literally where the pirates would bury their whatever loot they got, and they would leave markings oftentimes in that tree. Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, no, that's awesome. I had also actually put, yes, that also sweetgrass has the same issues that the desert sage has. So I'm going to put that on the no list. And like, there's a time and a place for all of those things. And generally, looking for our bioregional stuff is so much better way to go. Oh, that's awesome. I don't actually know. Liz, aren't you in Tampa? Oh, I didn't know you had a place in Little Gasparilla. So, that's awesome. The gumbo limbo tree is actually one of my favorites, and you can use the sap out of that for spiritual and physical medicine practices, as well as the aerial parts. The bark can be burned for smudge. Also, as long as we're talking smudge, and the sweet gum can be oh, nice. The sweet gum is also got a sap that can be burned. Liquabaris, whatever the heck its species name is, as well as the inner bark can be used for smudge. What other good smudge trees do we have? Those are my favorites. There's some smaller plants that can be used. And if we look at the concept of Olympia or the ritual bathing, which again, every traditional culture and religion has ritual bathing. In Judeo-Christian cultures, we look at baptism as a type of ritual bathing. The Limpiar is to bathe in Central South America. Mexico all have a version of where they beat you with plants and wash stuff off of you, if you will. All of those, the Cherokee have going to water as a type of ritual bathing as well. Yeah, gumbo limbo is a really fast grower. Unlike the lignum vitae, which I could go on for days about lignum vitae, that's a little bit slower. Mine's about 7 years old. I got a very small, and that one's like just hitting 8 feet now. I have another one that, for whatever reason, it didn't like where I put it. It's barely at 4 feet, and the one here at the school is maybe at 5 feet. I'm hoping it picks up steam once it kind of gets its feet in the ground. The gumbo limbo is pretty easy to propagate. Mine's quadrupled in size in 4 years. Not as fast as moringa, but darn near. Especially when it's young, it will snap in a high wind, but literally the part that's left in the ground will grow. And if you pick up the piece that snapped off and stick it in the ground, you'll have 2 trees. So it's very, very easy to propagate. It is drought tolerant, it is saltwater tolerant, so it is a coastal tree. So if you're near a canal, a mangrove swamp, don't put it in the salt water, but it does not mind getting salt spray at all. It's very, very easy one to use. All right, I'm tired and I have to get ready for class tomorrow. So if you don't know, I'm Bob Linde. I'm an acupuncture physician, registered herbalist, and director of the traditional School of Herbal Studies here in St. Petersburg, Florida, and a practitioner and own acupuncture and herbal therapies, where we have a bunch of acupuncture physicians, herbalists, spiritual workers, an apothecary that you can buy herbs from, plant nursery, and God knows what else. Check us out at Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies at acuherbals.com or traditionsherbschool.com. And if you're trying to get into the Chinese group program, you've got about 12 hours. So you'd better send an email and get some info. All of our classes, most of our classes, are both online and in person. We obviously love people in person. And we'll see you on the last Friday of next month. I know it's Turkey Day weekend. I don't care. I'll be babbling whatever that last Friday is, assuming that I have signal. See y'all again soon.